how many of you have some kind of understanding of IPC at this point of time, either in practice or it's as a matter of your course matter or course, syllabus or your coverage? Anybody?
Hello.
I'm going through. Yeah, please.
Yeah, sir. So I'm a fifth year law student, and I have been studying IBC. Last
Okay.
sem we had that as a subject, and I like the subject as well. So I study on my own accord as well.
Practical experience. You studied in the class, right, as a course matter. Have you have an opportunity to see the practical side of it on the ground, or it is a class issue, or you handle in the class time?
I have some practical experience. I was interning once, so I
Okay.
have been to NCLT quite a few times.
NCLT. Okay. Wow. Excellent. So you had good experience, better than me, of course. Good. Anybody else? Thank you, Janvi. Thanks so much. Anybody else? So I consider for today's discussion that majority people here joining us today are having overall understanding, basic understanding, and uh, practical side, of course, not seen. But since I can't gauge from this discussion of last 2 minutes, how many of us having a taco towards the IPC? So I'll take this opportunity to introduce to all of you for the benefit of the people who don't have access or don't have a tackle towards IPC. As a primer to the IPC process, because a new subject, as Janvi saying that she has interned to some extent and seen the classwork. So practical side IPC and the book IPC is slightly different, but I'm not differentiating today. Let's understand for the benefit of all here what is IPC at the first place itself and what is the need to be IPC at the it's a new subject. Why it come all the way? Why so much of talk about IPC, any of the pink paper, any of the business magazine, any of the law magazine, you talk it. Considerable print and electronic media is covering that particular topic. There must be something interesting, and there must be something solution which is attempted to resolve something which is impacting the overall economy. And economy is a very vast affair where all of us, whether we are practicing in the law, but we don't know what is the bank saying, but our career or our practice is also directly linked with the health of the economy. If this economy is not good, our practice also not making any major sense of it. And economy is very bad, then of course in require a legal intervention to set the things right. This exactly we stand at this point in time. We want to resolve a major problem in the economy at this point of time, where legal intervention, law intervention, or the new intervention to resolve those insolvency, resolve the stress asset in the hands of the banks is a paramount importance for everybody. Let's understand the primer of it, then we can take it forward from the presentation side. So basically, insolvency, as I say in a lighter mode, it is Diwalia. But what is the legal implication here? So insolvency is the state of business of a debtor. Debtor means the person who owes the money, in which he is unable to pay his liability and or has defaulted in the payment of his obligations. If anybody have any interest in English literature, then there is a novel which is very, at least I studied that novel in my graduation time, that is called uh, as a Merchant of Venice. Many people say it is a romantic novel. If anything you read from that angle, I read from a as an insolvency professional. I read it a couple of times just to reiterate what happened in the past. But are we progressing in terms of handling this insolvency or bank or handling the non-fulfillment of the obligations, or we have not walked down? We are in the same 500-year-old story, which is being projected by through this particular novel, Merchant of Venice. What is the link between today's discussion and Merchant of Venice? Is very simple. That in Merchant of Venice, there is a gentleman who has failed to meet his obligations towards his commitment, which is made to repay certain thing or had to act on certain things, and because his inability to pay, the creditor wants his pound of flesh in return of or as a punishment through non-fulfillment of the obligations. So whether it's a fiction or it's an actual story, if anybody have a opportunity to visit London, and I'm sure a couple of you can go very well because this is law. Law is a practice can take you any part of the world, depending upon your interest and your specific area of the operations. If you get time, next time when I go to London, check out the old London had buildings which is now being treasured and being considered as a museum. Those old buildings being considered as a specific prison cell for insolvent. So it is not only the fiction, it's the actual story that in olden time in English, which is very developed country in terms of the legal practice, world over, and being followed world over for that part, was having very stringent norms or very stringent punishment for anybody who is not able to meet his obligation. Till 1986, English was following the same principle. Even today they're following, but yeah, now they are following much more liberal way to handle if some business got failed and how to handle that part. I think UK law is always a reference point for all the law practices in any part of the, like by the civil law, is the criminal law, is the commercial law, is insolvency law also. But prior to 1986, the punishment for not meeting obligations were as severe as you can understand from the multiple things. So the second law, which is in reference, is US law, which is always propagate that if there is a failure of business by any reason and the person, individual or the business not able to meet his obligations towards what is written in the contract, then instead of giving a punishment which is not allowing him to flourish further, to recoup his business or recoup his position, allow him a chance to allow another opportunity to recover from the stress which is being going through by various reasons. Stress is not only because of business gone bad, but because of many other reasons. So these two law practices being considered majorly, which is the constituent, which is the foundation for any insolvency law practices world over. So basically, the two type of insolvency happen in any business, which is, I'm slightly going away from the law side. I'm just trying to see the commercial part of insolvency. What lead to what? What lead to insolvency? So two types of insolvency, which is the basis of understand or allow us to think what should be the next step. The business is not able to meet its obligation. What should we do? So for that, we have to see the reason why this stress is coming on the particular individual or the business. So two types of this. One is a balance sheet insolvency. As you know, everybody, individuals or corporates or the any business entity, have the balance sheet, asset and liability. If there is a stress in the balance sheet, that says when a debtor is stressed, assets are insufficient to meet all the obligations of that particular business, then the debtor is likely to be defaulted. He has an asset of 100 rupees, but he has an obligations or a liability of 150 rupees. Obviously, any point of time, he has the opportunity or he has a reason to default, not to meet his obligation to the extent of 50 rupees. So if that situation comes, there is a reason to look at the entire asset liability once again and try to recalibrate or rehabilitate the whole balance sheet in such a fashion that that business not go die, not reach to the bankruptcy, not reach to the liquidation side, but to recoup his position and start producing productive results. Normally, balance sheet insolvency are in situation where invocation of rehabilitation is possible, or if not possible, that you have to examine that. Second part usually happen a cash flow insolvency. Balance sheet is fine. The business has a good asset in hand. Those assets are good enough to take care of all obligations present in future. The problem is that those assets are not able to convert it into cash, because to meet the obligation, the business needs cash. And that mismatch of cash flow, if anybody has understanding of the commercial accounting or the commercial practices, you are finding difficulty to convert your asset into cash because you need to pay cash to meet your EMIs or your installments on time. If that situation comes, then what will happen? The debtor will default in his obligation not to pay his EMI on time as defaulted. And this default, if I now link with RBI norms, if you defaulted to a lender beyond 90 days of the due date, then that account become NPA. It means non-performing asset. And bank thereafter start taking action to recoup his asset from the defaulted entity. Under IBC, cash flow insolvency is a trigger for invoking insolvency process against that corporate, against that entity which is having defaulted. So what do you mean by bankruptcy? Many people use bankruptcy, liquidation, insolvency in a very interchangeable manner. Of course, in a local understanding and a generic understanding, you can interchangeably use those words. But legal terms, these are two different. There are two different status of this particular stress or different status of the default of that particular entity. What is bankruptcy? Bankruptcy is when a legal entity defaulted or not able to meet its obligation. It means the legal entity, and who is a legal entity? Companies, corporations, LLPs, which are artificial person. If they default, not able to meet their obligations, the first step is that they have to be referred to the bankruptcy so that they get some benefit of law, the protection from the law, and to restructure their balance sheet or restructure their cash flow system so that they can come back to normal life. But what happened to if they're not able to meet? Then that same legal entity is not able to meet after that first trial of to rehabilitate, to restructure their obligations or to restructure their entire business process once again. They're not able to meet these obligations even after that trial, that attempt. Then there will be liquidation. So liquidation, bankruptcy of legal entity or artificial person, first stage, where you are trying to restructure the business, and if you succeed, the business come back to the normal and they come out of the bankruptcy. If they're not able to do so, then they will go to liquidation. Liquidation means liquidate all their assets to meet all the obligations which are possible. Quite possible that there would be a percentage of obligation they are not able to meet. It means the creditor will not give full credit, full due out of their obligation, out of their dues from the debtor side. And once this happened, all the assets have been disposed of. There is nothing thereafter in the hands of the legal entity, artificial person. The artificial person or legal entity will be dissolved. It means company will be dissolved. We will refer to the dissolution. That will be removed out of the existence. What happened to natural person? Natural person can be bankrupt. Yeah, can be bankrupt because it's the same situation. Is not able to meet his obligations. So he's being classified as being declared as a bankrupt and referred to the insolvency practice or the recovery practice, whatever the prevalent in that particular country. And after that, if he's still not able to meet his obligations, after that time, what will happen? I can't dissolve it. I can't liquidate the natural person. The natural person has to remain live. That has to remain live. It means the person, insolvent person, not able to meet his obligations, whatever asset you have with him, take those assets, try to meet all the obligations possible. You're able to part of it, fine, close. Thereafter, allow the person to leave in his own manner, whatever the possible manner, whatever as per the law has been given to him. And that is the status when it's a bankrupt. And after will be what is the legal term over there? Undischarged bankrupt or discharged bankrupt. So discharged bankrupt is a common person, normal person. We have all the other benefit which I have a normal person. Undischarged bankrupt will have certain restrictions. If we get some time, we'll discuss about it. So, couple of laws prior to IBC, which was handling this situation of stress in the companies, in the artificial entity, legal person, or the natural person. What are the basic laws? A couple of laws which are prevailing in this country was first law being implemented and introduced in the world of economics, the world of commercial law, to handle the stress in the corporate, the called SICA, SIC units. Everybody knows SIC Industrial Company Special Provision Act 1985. Normally, we remember it by SICA, which is now repeated. That was the first term in the legal term to handle stress of corporate entities. And if the company can be rehabilitated after the first attempt, second attempt, then go back to its normal. If not, then SICA, which is effectively governed by BIFR, Board of Industrial and Financial Rehabilitation. If they find that this is not rehabilitable, then they refer this to High Court for dissolution of the company. That is how the culmination of bankruptcy or the stress of that corporate being taken care prior to IBC. Now SICA is repeat, so no further attempt on that side. Then 1993, there's another provision which is still prevalent in the country, which is called recovery of debt due to bank and financial institution. That is called DRT 1993, and DRT is still prevailing wherever the companies have been defaulted, entities have been defaulted. Those being referred to DRT to recover the dues of the creditors, whatever the dues they are able to. It's a recover. So keep this one word in mind when we discuss IBC going forward. Then in 2002, we brought it another law which is still prevailing and still very popular prior to IBC, and still banks are still preferring that particular law as SARFAESI, that Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Asset and Reinforcement of Security Interest Act 2002. In short, SARFAESI is a provision whereby, without intervention of courts, without intervention of any particular proceedings, the creditor can move against the defaulter and recover or sell the asset or sell the security, whatever they have, to recover their dues. Again, DRT and SARFAESI are talking of recovery, and that's something we'll discuss going forward. What is the difference between these two prevailing practices and the IBC? So now, prior to IBC, high courts have the jurisdiction over insolvency related issues in both the cases. Even DRT, when they're not being handled, as somebody want to appeal against DRT and go to High Court. Corporate bankruptcy, insolvency were covered in the complex multiple laws, some for the collective action and some for the debt recovery. As we discussed, SARFAESI, DRT primarily, most of the recovery side. Companies Act 1956 again deal with the situation where the company has not able to meet their obligations, primarily for the winding up the company. I think we do the same thing through IBC, but not referring to Companies Act for the purpose. No separate provision for restructuring except the merger and acquisition and voluntary compromise. Adjudication of Companies Act usually come through high courts. Now we are saying 230, 231, we are trying to come through NCLT also. But primarily Companies Act still go to High Court to larger extent if there is an issue regarding merger acquisition or those related. So prior to enactment of IBC, basic entity for debt recovery in India, in a nutshell, is the civil code, so civil proceedings. If the loan is backed by the security, I taken a housing loan, I taken a loan against the security of my house. If I defaulted, then the bank have an option to go through civil proceedings against me to recover that due. We can go to SARFAESI, and if it is amount is large and not able to sell through without intervention of the court, then we go to DRT and set the assets. So that was the proceeding. That was the predecessor of proceedings prior to IBC process. What is the process involved here? The process involved, you lodge a civil suit, either through DRT or in a high court if there is DRT is not the subject matter of that particular issue. Go for a arbitration if there is dispute. Go for arbitration and try to resolve through arbitration proceedings. Or Petition to High Court for winding up is a debtor is a company. So corporate, I'm talking of mostly the corporate side. So if you look at all those methods of recovery, primarily three things come out. One, that is a very long winding, time-consuming process. Number one. Number two, there's a civil suit, there's civil courts, which are effectively on the same platform on the same day. The judges, the honorable judges are also handling the civil cases, which is to something to do, nothing to do with the commercial activity. And the same next hearing of next case being heard about the bank recovery matters. Those courts are not specialized in handling or understanding the commercial sense of commercial contract in a deeper manner, especially when you're talking about complex corporate structure and complex stress issues. They are not able to do this. I can't blame them because nobody can blame them because ultimately this kind of commercial issues are require a specific understanding, specific knowledge about all those commercial areas, and have to have deeper understanding and to sit down. Not possible because mostly you are handling those in a non-acquisition manner. What happened? IBC process mostly resemble to an equestrial system, but the court is actively involved, unlike civil courts, and plays a significant role in preparing evidence, question the witness, and find the truth and the solution also at the same time. Because effectively, IBC, we are talking of not the recovery alone, we are talking of rehabilitation, or we are talking of resolution. We are not talking of recovery. So these are basic difference between DRT, civil suit, DRT, SERIFACI versus IBC. In all other areas other than IBC, we are simply focusing on the recovery of the amount. But let me stop for a minute and give you commercial angle to it at the same time, so you can understand why I'm talking of resolution, why IBC is resolution, and why not recovery. The business, any business, to talk of any business, and most of you guys, if you have the business in the house, you can figure out the business is not only the land and building. Business is not only the plant and machinery. The business also involved people who are working there, their knowledge, their clients, their customer, their equipment supplier, their raw material supplier, the consumer who purchase the equipment from, or purchase your panel goods from them. Your know-how, your technology, how to prepare the best cake in the city. It is not everyone can produce the unique product which is have more value or more acceptance in the market. So this all together and the vision of the promoter together become called the business. When you go for recovery, you are only handling the plant and machinery, land and building, if there's some money in the bank, and that's it. You're not taking care of the employees, you're not taking care of the know-how, you're not taking care of the patent, you're not taking care of the supplier, not taking the market, not taking the raw material supply. And that is the actual value in going terms. Plant and machinery only 10% or 12% or 15% of the balance sheet. The balance 85% balance sheet is consisting in today's world is the all other areas, all other actors, assets which are not being accounted for, cannot be recovered through the recovery process. That's the reason to maximize the recovery or maximize the value out of this failed business, you need to find the resolution instead of finding the recovery method. That is the basic difference. You are able to understand this difference, then it is easier to handle and to figure out what why IBC is talking differently than the precedents. The role of NCLT is so important here because NCLT, unlike the existing where there's an accused in the front of the court and court understand the evidences and to figure out the cross evidences and thereafter they give the judgment. Here in a complex business commercial understanding, you need a court which sit down, try to understand the problem, try to understand why it's gone wrong, what can be the best solution in the given circumstances, sit down, try to understand with all the stakeholders, listen them everybody, try to look at somebody is having a solution, better solution to resolve this business by resolution plan or resolution application, and then decide what is the best way to handle the maximization of value and to resuscitate the business. So that is the role of NCLT is very, very different than civil suit. In civil suit, there's no communication except the evidence box. That's it. NCLT is not talking, and let's say more advisory situation, more involving entity than the civil court, criminal court, and then I'm not talking about. The key objective in actuarial system to reduce the time of disposing a case to ensure the speedy justice. Now, just take an example. If, say, hypothetically, there's a company who got failed and not able to meet its obligation. They had a factory, say, in Thane. Because they are not able to meet their obligations, they stop business. Now, the court take 10 years to to decide what is the right way to do that. In 10-year time, employee gone away, customer gone away, no house to balance, people are not there, your customer are not there, your raw material purchaser, supplier not there, your consumer must have been moved to your competitors. What have been left out? Land and building, which is 10-year-old. Plant and machinery, completely junk. What do you recover out of them? Nothing. Asking me not to even the cost of the legal proceeding which you carried for 10 years. So it is directly deterioration of the value of a business which otherwise paid can be just applied. Only two ways to find out what is the best way to recover out of that particular situation. Number one, and dispose this case quickly within the time now. You can't have 10-year DRT. If anybody is handling DRT, you're going to handle the DRT. I'm going to tell you. DRT started in 1993. I heard that even today, after how many years? 28 years. Even today, DRT's handling cases were filed in 94, 95, 96. What we left out in those businesses? Just erasing. So, in NCLT, judges play an active role in deciding time petition and may accept or reject time petition. Prior to enactment of IBC, there was a multiple judicial for the adjudicating of the bankruptcy. We discussed that part. Often the fora interested with adjudicating on a matter relating to insolvency and bankruptcy did not possess business and financial expertise, and that you need to understand as a practitioner of the law. That what is the difference between a normal court and the NCLT? And this is why NCLT is the first place now talking about the IBC. All the other stakeholders are talking about. They don't possess business or financial expertise, information, or bandwidth to decide on the such matters. That's exactly the situation. This leads to delays and extension in arriving to the outcome and increase the vulnerability of appeal for outcome. And the outcomes are obviously suboptimal, not reciprocating the value of the particular failed business. One more thing I like to tell before we jump into the IBC, what is IBC all about? That unlike most of the cases, unlike most of the other judicial or the legal practices, whereby always we follow on the case laws and say, okay, what happened in this particular case? What has been decided by Kolkata High Court or Mumbai High Court or Chennai High Court or Supreme Court? We normally entire practice, law practice in the country, or world over, will depend on the case laws. Unlike NCLT and IBC is not. All the Supreme Court judgment which we are talking about, it's a more clarifactory, where the law, when IBC being framed, has not been discussed, not been seen, not been envisaged, this kind of situation. So the Supreme Court come and clarify the law. That's it. Otherwise, NCLT, mostly IBC cases are not based on the case law. So many times in my fellow practitioner has some question, and if we ask some, advisory, after taking the advisory, the first question comes: do you have any case law? And I always tell, need not to have the case law at the first place itself. NCLT not depending on the case laws, not depending on the precedences. It is every case is unique. Every case is unique, like your face. So you are finding you stolen, you're standing in the crowd, and somebody want to say humshakal. There's no humshakal, because in NCLT every single case, or IBC every single case is unique, has its own nuances. You need not to decide by the case law. You don't get जुड़वा भाई नहीं मिलेगा. So case laws are not precedent or not being depending upon in terms of IBC practice. With that, let us understand. If you understand this basic, which is primarily different than give you slightly different understanding than the normal practice being followed, other than IBC, that we can forward. So, what is the structure of IBC? There's a committee which is framed in 2015 under Vishwanathan. They're called PLRC. PLRC was the first committee who was given a recommendation to set up insolvency practice and insolvency regime as a new regime to take care and supersede all the other laws which is prevailing in this country at the point of time. And that committee report, which came in November 2015, is the basis of this entire insolvency practice. What is the basis of it? Primarily, unilateral good practices being world over prevailing is the guiding factor for deciding and to frame the insolvency law, which IBC is 2016. What are the major components? 5-6 components we can discuss, and then we can discuss from the both side. So there's a board which is primarily a regulator called Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India. His main role is a regulator, so they regulate the entire practice, entire insolvency and bankruptcy regime in this country. They frame the regulation for implementation of provisions by IBC. So IBC is the law, but IBC, the IBPI is the regulator to create the infrastructure, to create the regulation and laws and rules to ensure that the IBC being implemented in a manner it is being envisaged at the first place. For setting up infrastructure for effective application and implementation by IBC. The second leg of semi-regulatory agency is being called insolvency professional agencies, which are primarily a facilitator for the profession of insolvency professional, to give them a platform, to give them to empower them, to guide them, to mentor them, and to regulate them same time. So it is an intervening entity between IBPI and insolvency professionals. Thereafter come the insolvency professionals. I'm not discussing insolvency professional here. Eligibility is available. Anybody who is completed and a member of a law bar for 10 years, or you are chartered accountant practice for 10 years, or you had a management experience of more than 15 years, you can eligible to write the exam for IBPI limited insolvency test. And if you are clear that test, eligibility is 60% marks, and if you are eligible, then you have to go for a pre-registration training. And if everything is being adhered to, then you will be registered with IPA and then subsequently IBPI as a insolvency professional. What is the role and regulations and role and responsibility of IP insolvency professional? We'll discuss forward. Then thereafter, there is a information utility in the, if you know, in the legal practice or in the insolvency practice also, the information is the key. Unfortunately, prior to IBC, information is scattered all over the. You will find somewhere in the registrar of office that information. Sometimes in an ROC, sometimes in MCA, and sometimes you don't get the information at all. So information utility is also being considered as an important tool, is a custodian and repository of all the information related to corporate insolvency and now personal insolvency also, so that that information can be collated and be accessed to by all the stakeholders, right from IBPI to NCLT and the insolvency professional in a structured manner, so that can be used for speedier disclosure of the cases. Thereafter, very important entity that is called educating authority. Who is educating authority? Who is educating authority here? Can anybody allow me to stay for a minute and answer for me? Who is called educating authority in IBC regime? Educating authority is the NCLT, National Company Law Tribunal, which is at this point of time have the benches across the country, 15, 16, all major stations, all major headquarters of have today. Not all states, but yeah, 16 now, at 14 at this point of time. and each of the bench, each of the station have 5 to 6 courts, depending upon the case load over there. Then there is an entity on top of it, the appellate authority, that is called NCLAT, National Companies Law Appellate Tribunal. That is now two locations, Delhi and Chennai. And if there is a issue, if you had an issue with an NCLT decision, any aggrieved party can apply for a to appellate, that is NCLAT. And if somebody is not happy with the NCLAT order also, he or she can go to Supreme Court for clarification matters. Supreme Court don't decide the cases. They give a clarification in the law, reference law, and then go back to NCLT, say, based on this, in light of this particular decision, you decide the case and move forward. So very linear hierarchy as far as IBC is concerned. To who this IBC is applicable? So right from any corporate, that Company Act 2013, 1956, any entity who is registered under that entity, limited liability entities, LLPs, are part of it. Partnership firm, individuals, or any business related entity which can be considered, including individuals, are effectively subject matter of IBC. But as of today, only 3 part of those entities have been notified for coverage under IBC. There are corporate person, corporate companies incorporated under Companies Act 2013, or any under previous company law, that is 1956, or any company who is governed by the special act for the time being in force. That's okay. So any PSU which is being enacted or is being formed by special law or special act also are covered under IBC. The limited liability partnership incorporated under Limited Liability Partnership Act, and personal guarantor to corporate debtor. So this is, as I say, that individuals are also covered, but not all. As of now, only guarantors, any personal guarantor who has given their guarantee to secure any corporate loan, any corporate debt, those are covered under IBC as of now. So this is the coverage of IBC. Let's go to the presentation, if you can please help me. Yeah. So, as I say, the basis of IBC is primarily the law which has been framed time to time by UNITRAL. If you are a law student, you can understand its importance in the law practice. This is a subsidiary body of General Assembly of United Nations. It prepared two kind of legislative needs. They cover international legislative text for using by states. States means countries in modernizing commercial laws. Not all commercial laws are modernized. Some are as ages old and a century old. So UNITRAL are using a uniform text for different countries to modernize their commercial law to attune with the present requirement of the new modern business, new practice. They also use non-legislative text for use by commercial parties in negotiating the transaction. Means, like for example, you want to do a commercial transaction between Dubai and India, between US and India, between US and Australia, between US and China. So those two parties, which are not legal, those are not legislative, this is not government parties, no non-government entities. How do they frame their contract? What should be uniform tax which is acceptable universally in all the areas, not only between India and China, but it's a uniform law which can be uniform tax for those commercial contracts among the parties which are operating. They're primarily to facilitate the international trade so that you can take the benefit of economies and world over. These two major areas being covered by UNITRAL, and by virtue of that, so they are covering insolvency law also, which is the first time they brought in 2005. The draft which have been used is covering 3 parts: insolvency law, especially corporate insolvency, they are not going to personal insolvency majorly, barring some jurisdictions. Mostly personal insolvency is not being talked much about, primarily to foster and encourage the adoption of effective national corporate insolvency regime. So they are giving a text, they're giving an overall framework. Within that individual country can free or are free to create their own solvency laws. So this is the framework which is governed or being seen as the mother or kind of foundation for insolvency and bankruptcy code 2015, 2016 as far as India is concerned. Just beyond the law, basically, if you look at the banking practice or the corporate credit practice, is primarily a limited liability company is a contact between equity and the debt. The entrepreneur or the shareholder being the equity, but that equity is not good enough to take care of the overall requirement of the funds of the entity. So there is a debt will come to support that requirement of the company so that they can carry out the business. As long as debt obligations are met, equity have complete control. Equity shareholder has a complete control, board has a complete control, promoter has a complete control on the businesses. Creditors have no say how to run the businesses as long as the company is not defaulting the business. As long as I'm meeting my obligations, I'm not expecting my banker will come every day to check out whether I'm leaving the house or not leaving the house. But when the default takes place, control is supposed to be transferred to the creditors. Thereafter, equity holder, promoters, directors don't have any say. Equity has no say in the system. That is the international practice. But in India, the promoter, despite they have defaulted, despite the account become NPA, they still remain in control of the company and take all the benefit of that business. The business is not meeting their obligation toward the income tax, sales tax, employees, PF. They're not paying their dues to the supplier. They're not making their payments, EMI payments or loan payments to the banks, but still they enjoy all the benefits. This is practice in India prior to IBC. US insolvency and UK insolvency we have discussed prior to that, so I'm not taking for the time. Can you please take next slide? This phase is prior to IBC. I think we discussed that part. I'm not further devoting some time on it, but this is the slide I request you can share with the participant here, so they can understand what is the journey right between 1993 and 2016. We had the SICA in 83. We had 93. We had the DRT in 2001. We had a CTR. If anybody handling corporate lending practice in their law system, they can understand what CTR used to be most short of the process whereby they can try to resolve the stress in the company. Thereafter, 2002, there comes the SERIFIC, we talked about it. Then 2014, we come with a SMA, special mention account, JLF, joint lender forum to address the stresses in the company. Then we talk of SDR, strategic debt restructuring 2015. And then in between, we talk about 5x25, flexible restructuring for long-term debt. All those practices being followed right from 1983 to address stress in a corporate book, so that value which has been sunk in that business should not go waste. Whatever we can do, try to do to recover those assets so that we can make best uses of those assets or the money which are invested. But unfortunately, NPA is continuously increasing, becoming a cause of worry for everybody, including the new generation, young generation, like person like you and me. So 2016 was the latest attempt to address the system by understanding what are the issues in all these previous regimes and try to address the solution through the new regime that is called IBC 2016. What are the basic understanding, including this part? I will discuss a couple of it. Yeah, I think that's the basis of it. In recovery processes prior to IBC, lenders, who are the major stakeholders, had no say in the recovery system. The civil suit, civil court is handling the cases. they handle the way it is being handled in other cases. They don't understand the commercial nuances of those contracts. And banker mostly on the receiving end, the creditor. I'm not saying banker, creditor. You and me also be creditor because we have invested debentures and we have given the loan to the corporate from our own individual. Okay, we have no say on those recovery processes. It took 10 years, it took 15 years, it took 20 years. End of the day, I'm not getting anything out of it. I have to still meet the cost through that litigation. This was the major issue. Despite the fact I lost the money in that business, I had no say in recovery process. Another issue was when a loan default happened, it's not a, what do you think? It is a commercial issue or is it a legal issue? You have given loan to me, I have not paid you back. It's a legal issue. No. Being a banker and being an insolvency professional, of course, now I'm not a legal person. So my view is very clear that it's not a legal issue, it's a commercial issue. I'm not able to pay the money. Either I don't have the money, or I squandered the money, or I don't want to pay by my will deliberately, whatever it is. But it is not the legal, it's not the legal issue. But in civil suits, civil court, this entire thing being handled as it's a dispute. There is no dispute. You have given me money to me and I'm supposed to pay you back on time. That's it. But it's a dispute. Dispute to the extent only that you prove that I have not taken money from you. That's it. That's only. Prove that there is no debt and there is no default. We discuss in IPC what happened there. It's a time-consuming process. As I told, in some of the cases, DRT, my other colleagues from banking side tell me, they filed DRT suits 94, 95, 96. This grew to 2021. They're still waiting for some recovery. Nothing happened. And they don't get any recovery out of it. It's such a system. And during this period, value of the security deteriorate like anything. Unless you had a security at the Malabar Hit, perhaps you can recover more money than supposed to. Otherwise, you not get even 5%, 4%. Then entire previous proceedings, recircuiting that business is nobody's priority. Neither DRT, except Sika, to some extent they spoke about it, but failure was 98% there. No success, no. See, Serifesi also talking a recovery. They are not recircuiting the business. They are not trying to recover the value, full value, or the maximum value of the business. Then, okay, fine. Recovery. So that recovery was the focus. So what is the recovery? Most of the time, the recovery was right from 1983 because that's the formal way of first time adding the stress. Till 2016, all proceedings in between, the total recovery is only 26%. For every 100 rupee, I had lost 74 rupee as a creditor. Only 26%. Number one. Average time for addressing this or resolving these issues or particular case is about 4.3 years. Now this is average. Because the DRT cases are pending for last 26, 27 years. And average carrying cost, legal fees, litigation fees, setting those assets, securing those assets so that not deteriorate, somebody should not betray those assets. All those costs to keep this litigation on is about 8 to 9%. So what is the actual recovery? 26 minus 9%. How much you got? 2%. So that was all for the previous learning, IBC. That's why IBC said. So based on the PRC committee recommendations and report 2015, IBC was formally notified by Government of India with effect from 1st December 2016. This is the most important part. Section 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, you can read in the book, and I'm not too section specific free. But I want to give you the overall picture so that you can understand whether it's work or not. Because most of the time I hear from young people, kuch hota nahi hai aisa risk hai. Especially I'm talking to legal people because they are impatient. They are not seeing the world. They are not seeing the previous world. They are not seeing DRT world. So they are still saying there's most outlets are within 6 months it should be completed, 180 days. But there's 2.5 years, 3 years. So what is the benefit of that? Is failed activity, not going anywhere. Every day I hear from young people who are either with my team or sitting across have the similar understanding. So understand this basic and try to understand what happened previously, what is happening elsewhere. Then we can make a sense whether it's make some sense or we are wasting our time there. IBC is an integrated unified insolvency resolution process. Mind it, see the word. I'm saying insolvency and insolvency resolution approach. I'm talking a resolution. In IBC, you never find there's a word called recovery. Resolution. That is, there's a dispute or there is an issue of insolvency, means person is not able to meet his obligations in time, either because of balance sheet insolvency or by the cash flow insolvency. We try to resolve that issue so that business can come back to. By virtue of that come back to, what will happen? I will able to maximize the value. I will not be 100 rupee and 10 rupee, which is happening today. So I can very well understand many people say, no, what is the difference? Still we are getting a haircut of 18%, 90%. Yeah, but on what cases? Which cases? We'll discuss forward. How it can happen maximization value? Only when I run this call process through a time-bound exercise. So this is a time-bound exercise, irrespective of what happened. Any insolvency proceedings will be completed in 180 days. If not, in 270 days. If not, in 330 days. If not, thank you so much. Then I'll go for liquidation. No question asked further. So there is a time norm strictly being followed, at least by the practitioner, if not by the NCLT. And tomorrow, if you become NCLT, just please mark it. Your primary role is to resolve the business, resolve that case with a time bound. Because time is able to recover the value or to maximize the value, not otherwise. Okay. Then is taking care of interest of all the stakeholders. It's not talking only in SERIFESI. Only lender who has the security can go and recover his security by selling the asset. That's it. What happened to the employee has not paid for 3 years? What happened to supplier is not being paid at all? What happened to the government who is not being paid taxes for last 5 years? Those stakeholders also have stake in that business to run it profitably. When business got failed, these people go high and dry. They don't get anything out of it. In IBC, the provisions are there to take care of their interest also. Whether it's being taken care or not taken care, I'm not going to that particular discussion. But provision very clearly saying that if you're not balancing the interest of the stakeholder, you would not be, that plan, the resolution plan would not be approved by NCLT. So you have to take care of interest of all the stakeholders, to pay employees, to pay workmen, to pay the operational creditors who supply goods and services, to pay government dues if they're having left out. Of course, there's a different hierarchy for crown dues, not the way it is being prior to IBC or out of the IBC to this. We have to create a balancing between all those stakeholders. Insolvency, as we discussed the first line, insolvency means when a person who is not able to meet his obligations on time, he failed, he defaulted, and say insolvency. But prior to IBC, there was no definition of insolvent in any law in the country. The only reference comes through SICA, BIFR, where they say that Act says if net worth of a particular company or the corporate is eroded more than 50%, that company is supposed to be called as an insolvent. Means if the company has eroded to net worth to the extent of 49%, not 50%, the company is still good to go, good to run the business. But the moment he defaults 1 more percent or net worth reduced by another 1%, 49 to 50, immediately the company will become insolvent. That was the only definition. Now, because of that, lot of issue came. Deliberately, companies have eroded their asset, their net worth, bring it down to 45% and hold it. And after they said, I'm not able to pay because my business is not working well. Because they cannot be called insolvent. Because The definition is not. Definition is below 50%. In IBC, this hierarchy 45-50 over. What is the default definition of default? What is the definition of default in Indian context?
Inability to pay debts.
Okay. Okay. What is the definition of NPA?
An asset whose liabilities exceed the net the value.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else can improve upon? There is a clear-cut definition of NPA in the banking system. And this is legal matter. This is not IBC matter. It's a legal matter. Okay. If any borrower, if any debtor not able to pay its obligation on due date, it means if the AMI is due on 30th June, if he has not paid on 30th June, he has defaulted. Okay? I think there should not be any confusion over there. The day I not meet my obligation on due date, the amount this is amounted as a default. Now, if this default continues for more than 90 days, then account become NPA, non-performing asset. It means that if I had defaulted on 30th June, I had not paid my EMI, I had defaulted. But if this default of my non-payment of NPA EMI on 30th June, it continue for next 90 days. It means if this default continues up to 28th of September, 90 days, not 3 months. So you have to count 90 days from 1st of July on 28th of September. If this default continues, this account being called as an NPA in the books of the bank. Okay, and I will be tagged as an NPA account, referred to as a non-performing asset to wherever. Okay, so in insolvency, in IBC practice, IBC process, if there's a payment default, account become NPA 90 days, I'm eligible to be called as an insolvent. 90 days default, that's it. I did not to wait for 49% on net worth erosion, which will happen in 20 years, 30 years. We never come to know when it happened. But this is more quantifiable, very clear. I'm not able to meet my obligation on 30th June, I got defaulted. I still defaulted, the default continues for more than 90 days. 28th September, my account will be called as an NPA and referred to RBI. On that particular day onwards, bank will not able to charge any interest or not to earn any interest on that. That is the first loss to the bank. Second loss to the bank, not only they will not earn interest on that bank or any income on the bank on that account, but they also have to keep some part of their profit to a separate reserve. So to take care of loss of this particular business or lot of this particular asset, if there is a case of non-recovery at all of this loan amount, first place itself. So I have to create a separate provisioning, and that provisioning is credit. Start with 10%, goes to 15%, 20%, 30%, and then 100%. So insolvency test has moved from net worth erosion to payment default, and payment default in RBI terms 90 days. Account become NPA within 90 days of default. This is the major difference. This is nothing but to create a financial discipline in the ecosystem of any country. Otherwise, the default will be incipient, remain in the books for next 10 years, 20 years. We never come to know when this died. But now we are saying the moment your temperature is 100, you're supposed to be admitted to hospital. There's something like that. The moment you have not paid your installment for more than 90 days, you are supposed to be called as an insolvent and need a treatment through IBC. That is what the difference is. The major difference here. Secondly, is replace the SICA as we discussed and modify at least 12 more acts through their various provisions. One more thing I want to tell you. Wherever there is a jurisdiction of NCLT and IBC process, all other law except Limitation Act, all other laws are superseded by IBC provision. All other laws, mind it. right from income tax, sales tax, GST. Your PMLA is a parallel activity. There's some confusion still there. Companies Act. All acts are superseded by the provision of IBC process, IBC Act, IBC code numbers. Except Limitation Act. Limitation Act has not modified and remain as a sacrosanct for a very simple reason, because through IBC you cannot bring back a older dues of more than 3 years. You can't bring it. So Limitation Act had to have again the issue of financial discipline, that you can't sleep on your asset not recovering for next more than 10 years, and one particular day you walk up and say, okay, fine, after 10 years you give me that money. You can recover the money, but not through the legal process. So that is how being captured as it is in the IBC also. Other than this, almost 12 more acts have been notified and have been superseded by IBC provision. All of you who are practicing law, you will notice, not as a law practitioner, but as a third person, outsider. Just observe, all the legal matters in any court of law are primarily suffer from one particular problem, that is the symmetry of information. What appellant says, respondent don't understand or not recognize. What respondent says, appellant not consider at all. So they are in a two different world, and never come to a point of fact that this is the fact of the matter. Accept the fact, accept the dispute, accept there is an issue, and a very large year or large period has been spent on bringing these two people together. And that's the reason most of the time we hear that decision of the court is not correct. Most of the time we come up with it. The reason is very simple, because the decision based on the immature or half information, you never harmonize the information at the first place or the fact of the case of the first place itself. So there's a complete asymmetry of the fact of the case or information, which is created problem to give a proper jurisdiction or proper judgment. In IBC, right from filing application, everything is structured. You cannot talk anything. I most of the time I read DRT pleadings and Supreme Court pleadings, non-IBC pleadings, and I saw our learned lawyers are writing, I think, Mahabharata at the first place itself. Where they start and where they end, and after 3,000 pages, you come to know what is the fact of the case. It never comes to. But IBC, you cannot do so. You cannot write anything other than what has been asked for, because it's structured. Is more like a MCQs. So the one question, 4 answer. You have to answer one of them. You can't answer 4 of them or 2 of them. So it is more structured sharing of information among the parties, so you can come to the fact quickly instead of wasting time on both sides. That's a major achievement in IBC as far as legal part is concerned. Second change is very important, is the change of priorities. So far, if you have not heard about IBC, so far in India, the crown dues, sovereign debt, government dues, that is the first priority. First priority. आपको तनख्वाह मिलता है, उससे पहले से आपका टीडीएस काट दिया जाता है. आप उसको कितना बोलो, इस महीने टीडीएस मत काटो, अगले महीने लेना है, को दिवाली बनाना है. Nothing goes. Why? Because this is a government dues. And go out of, before salary come to your account, TDS has already been remitted to the government. That's the priority of government dues, not under IBC. IBC government dues are having much lower priority. We discussed how the priority hierarchy is being considered in IBC. But crown dues are not the first priority, unlike many other laws. Except IBC, no other law has any other way out without understanding the hierarchy of crown dues, the first priority. Only IBC is the only reason we say no, fine. I know you are government of India, but stand in the queue. Pound 5% down the line, not in front of me. Secondly, when account become NPA in the previous receipt, despite the fact account has become NPA, salaries are not being paid, the customers have not been paid, employees have not been paid, lenders have not been paid, but the promoter or the board of directors or the owner of the business, they enjoy all the benefit of that business. To some extent, they draw equal salary they used to draw in the good time. They don't reduce their luxuries out of the business. But IBC, no. The moment case is admitted, NCLT pronounced the order for initiation of NCIRP under IBC. That very day, the board of the directors, because this is a corporate entity, board of directors power has been suspended. They cannot take any decision. All the powers are vested with the insolvency professional. Insolvency professional assume the office to control all the affairs of the company, including bank accounts, all the asset, all the business management, everything is come under control of the insolvency professional, and the board power is suspended. So what happened there? The day a case is admitted under IBC, the debtor in possession, which we discussed at first place, despite the fact you defaulted, you're still in control. No, in IBC, the moment it is proven that you defaulted and admission happened of insolvency application under NCL, under section 7, 9, 10, whatever it is, the debt creditor come in control. How creditor come in control? Through RP, because RP is appointed by NCLT. RP will ask for the claims from the creditors, and based on the claims, they form a creditors committee that is called COC. And the COC run the business. So COC, nothing but the creditors. They run the business, they direct the business, and executive power remain with the RP. So RP run the business on the directions of the COC. So what has happened here? The defaulter, board of director, owner has gone out of the business. All powers of their decision making, physical and otherwise, have been taken away, including the bank accounts. And creditor assume the responsibility and the ownership of the business. This is exactly in the first slide we talk about it. And this is as at par with international practices, where if you default, you have no control. Till you have not defaulted, you are the owner of the business. The moment you defaulted, you go out of it, and creditor take control of it. It's a complete different than the previous system. Second part is the civil suit, recovery suit. You go to Metropolitan Magistrate, then I don't know the hierarchy, where it goes, but it goes to Supreme Court after 20 years. Why? Because there are multiple jurisdictions in the civil system, civil law system. In IBC system, 3 places to go. Start with NCLT. If you're not happy with the NCLT decision, you can go and appeal against to NCLAT. You're not happy, go to Supreme Court and take the direction. That's it. And come back to NCLT once again. You cannot waste my time and going to Metropolitan Magistrate, to X Magistrate, to Y Magistrate, to High Court, and then Supreme Court. And after 20 years, you come back and say, this is the decision. And that comes in my favor, of course. Then creditor lose that business also. So it's a very linear focused jurisdiction system. That's the reason the most typical case in NCLT and IBC handled so far is the SR Steel. I wish that if you are really interested in IBC process as a practice or as your knowledge as per your course, please read SR Steel matter right from the day 1 to when it resolved. If IBC was not there, I can tell you this case cannot be resolved in next 20 years also. But in IBC, resolved in 28 months. Of course, it is much longer than 6 months which you're talking about. But yeah, we are starting. 28 months is a real achievement of IBC. If they can resolve SR Steel in 6 months, they can resolve any other cases within the norm time. Yeah, so that's a unique aspect of insolvency court. This gives creditors a confidence, especially the creditor in control kind of situation. The moment now the new loan, the new credit lines, a new proposal, if a bank is thinking twice, is thinking today, he knows very well, if you default, I can take control of your business. Borrower also understand very clearly, debtor also understand very clearly. If I default, they take away my business. So that discipline, the financial discipline, which is the major achievement of IBC, is now coming in the front side of the debtor. Simply can't default and start getting exclusive. ये हो गया, वो हो गया, पैसा नहीं है. उसको पता है ये पैसा मेरा business चला जाए. I'm a practicing insolvency professional. The bigger pain to the owner of the business when you take the order of NCLT, go to his office and say, I'm so and so, this is the order. Please vacate this office. Tell me who's your bank account. Give them the letter to the bank. All the powers of board has been suspended. They cannot write the check. And all the checks they written previously are also not valid. You can't honor the checks. And tomorrow onwards, all your directors, all your employees, including CFO, CTO, this and that, all will be reporting to me, not to board, not to Lalit, not to safety. It's a major difference. You can see that pain in the eyes of the person who otherwise take this whole system for right and not taking the right action to take care of his own obligations. This is a major discipline. Going forward, I'm expecting financial discipline to be much more smoother than not. Who are the stakeholder here? So I distinguish in three categories. Financial creditors. This has been defined in our code. Financial creditors are the creditor, a lender who has lent the money to the corporate debtor. CD means corporate debtor. It means the borrower, the corporate entity who has defaulted. The lender or one who lent the money to corporate debtor against the constitution of time value of money. Time value of money. What is time value of money? Sorry.
Money today is more valuable than money tomorrow.
Okay. So hold in your storage, hold in your locker. 100 rupee today, 100 rupee today would be more valuable 100 rupee tomorrow. So hold in your locker. Don't show it to anybody. No, 100 rupee will become 110 rupee tomorrow.
When lent out to another party, if I don't have access to the money today,
yeah, please.
Then yes. If I don't have, if the same money given to me today instead of giving to me later, it has more value today. I can make use of it.
Okay, very good. So you touch upon. Thank you so much. Okay. So basically, what is happening? Money is a value, right? Money has a value. Of what value? To purchase, to consume, to invest, to make more money, right? So if I give money, if you give money to me, what you are doing? You are excluding your right to use that money for any purpose, any other purpose, and you have given that right to me to use that your money. It means you have passed on that value of money to me. Okay. When this money will go back to you? When I pay back, right? So this value migration, which happened from you to me for a specified period. Say hypothetically, you given me 100 rupees today and saying, okay, Harish, after 6 months, you give me 100, give this money back to you. So next 6 months, you are not able to use your 100 rupees. You are given that rupee to me. Okay. I use it for what? For productive purposes. What I did, I earn money out of it. There's a profit on that, of course. So after 6 months, since you have passed on that value to money to me by lending that money to me, you are supposed to be compensated against that value. What is the value? Interest. So there is a constitution of interest payment on that a transaction between you and me. So after 6 months, when the money becomes due, I'm supposed to pay you 100 rupees, that's a principal amount. plus interest thereon, which is agreed upon, 10%, 20%, 50%, whatever the money, 5%. Along with the interest, I have to give back to money. So this transaction between you and money of lending, taking money from you and paying you back with the interest is called, this transaction is a time value of money. How you can differentiate? When you give your 100 rupee to your sister as a gift on her birthday, right? What is that transaction? Are you expecting that money come back to you? No. Are you expecting that it will come to you and also with the interest thereon? No. So is the transaction is the time value of money? No. Is it the lending transaction? No. If that transaction is there, you are not financial creditor. But in the previous case, you are financial creditor and I am the borrower. When I don't pay, you had a right of financial creditor to sue against, to recover that money against the borrower. And transaction between you and me being classified as a lending transaction, which is being taken care on the principle of time value of money. And my role under this new regime of IBC will be financial creditor. The other creditor could be operational creditor. What is the operational creditor? The people, the entity who supplied goods and services to corporate debtor or the entity. And if the entity had defaulted, the corporate operational creditor also can move against me under IBC process. Then central government, state government, local bodies, we as a business were supposed to pay taxes. If we don't pay the taxes on time, they also have stake in the business. They also can move against the government, that particular entity, defaulting entity, and claim their dues. So they're also one of the external stakeholders. What are the internal stakeholders? Promoters, equity holders, because they also had a stake in the business. They are also called internal stakeholders. Who else? Corporate debtor itself, the entity, the company or the LLP. They're also internal stakeholders because they're also independent of all of us. And there's another entity called resolution application. I'm not discussing forward. If you have time to discuss forward. So what is the trigger of initiation of insolvency? And this is called for all our practical purposes and for your purposes also when you go through the literature of IBC. Very often you will hear corporate insolvency resolution process. And this is structured nomenclature given. The entire process of running this IBC is called corporate insolvency resolution process. We call as CIRP. So what is trigger for it? Where a corporate debtor, now we understand who is the corporate debtor. He committed default, we understand the default now. To a financial creditor, we understand the financial creditor now. Or the corporate debtor committed default to a operational creditor. We understand operational creditor now. Or corporate debtor himself or herself has decided to declare themselves as an insolvent. Right? Self-insolvency. So they can also file application under section 10. If corporate debtor defaulted against a financial creditor, financial creditor can file application for CIRP under section 7 or operational creditor under section 9. So trigger is clear. Default is clear. Defaulted when the money has not been paid and after 90 days also not being paid. This is called default in terms of CIRP. What is the amount of default? Either of these three people, or sorry, two people, financial creditor or operational creditor. If the default is more than 1 crore, this amount has been changed. Previously, it was 1 lakh rupees prior to March 2020. So, you can initiate CIRP against the corporate debtor. NCLT, Educating Authority, which you're talking, and I wish that you should be aware of it. And NCLT is the educating authority in IBC regime. They have certain powers. What are the powers? NCLT can accept or reject CIRP application filed by either financial creditor or operational creditor or financial debtor or sorry, corporate debtor itself. they can accept or reject the application. They had a power. They can also adjudicate any matter come during the CIRP process related to CIRP. They approve or reject resolution plan. Resolution plan I am not discussing. Let it come, we'll discuss that part also. NCLT has the power to approve or reject a resolution plan. Or if time comes and resolution is not possible or not approved or rejected, then NCLT also order for liquidation under IBC, liquidation of artificial person, legal person. So these are the powers of NCLT. Of course, we can discuss next 2 days also large this thing. But basic, this is the NCLT is the center point for entire process of IBC. They have starting point to end point. They start the insolvency, they adjudicate insolvency during the process. They approve the resolution plan and take the company out of the insolvency. And if it is not possible, then they take it to liquidation and subsequently dissolution. So that is how the NCLT works end to end. I think we discussed that part. The first objective IBC is a time-bound resolution of stress asset. We cannot run it for 10 years because if I run for 10 years, immediately second objective being defeated. That's a maximization of value of corporate debtor. Maximization value of corporate debtor. That's a thing, because I don't want to see financial asset, productive assets have a meaningful role in taking care of the health of the economy, health of people, health of nation. I don't want to see the destruction of this value simply by wasting time on the legal matters. So we want to maximize the value, and for very purpose we want resolution time bound. Third thing is prompting the entrepreneurship. Many people ask this question: how is entrepreneurship is promoted under IBC? Anybody who can tell me how it is being promoted under IBC, if you understand a bit now? Anyone?
In very simple words, IBC, the way it differs from the normal civil court proceedings, it's not there to punish or penalty. It is there to hold hand when the corporates or the companies default. So it's not about dismantling everything and in general words, if I have to say, it holds hand. So that is how it promotes entrepreneurship, because it gives a chance for the business to survive.
Business, not the promoter. Mind it. That's exactly what I want to hear from you. Yeah, it is, because promoter is not the business. Business is the ecosystem of the business. Promoter is only one person who runs the show. Okay, if promoter is failed because of whatever the reason, is not competent enough, he's not able to meet his competition, he's not able to see the new business, new challenges, he's not able to meet the challenges, he's not able to reduce the cost so that competition take over, he's not able to see through, not able to see the new challenges coming to the business, or he had the intention to defraud the lenders and take the money out, diverted the money. He has the intention, malfeasance is involved. He has committed certain things which are not supposed to be done, and that injures the health of the organization. All included. Very many reasons can happen why business goes wrong, not necessarily one. Okay, it means the person has failed to meet his requirement of the business. What he need to be done? That particular person had to be taken out, and a new person, which you find now in the given circumstances, is better than the previous one, or is able to handle new challenges, new business, new issues prevailing today, and to recirculate the business. You should be given chance. What will happen in the previous regime? Despite the fact the business has gone wrong, it making losses, not paying his dues to anyone, but still he's hanging on that business. It is a destruction of value. It is not promoting entrepreneurship, because that same business can be handled by somebody much more profitably, much more effectively, but that person cannot come inside because there is no provision of creditor in control. It's always debtor in possession, despite the default. But IBC, you can take this person out, bring the new person through resolution plan by way of resolution applicant, and recircuit the business. That is how the entrepreneurship can be promoted. The business remains same. You remove the one person to manage the show to bring the new person. And lastly, but very important, that is creating in balancing the interests of all the stakeholders. In SERIFESI, the lender will go sell his land is building, sell his plant and machinery. What happened to employee who was not paid salary for 4 years, 2 years, 1 year? Government was not paid tax for last 10 years. Suppliers who supplied the raw material but not get anything because SERIFESI is not giving any space for that. In IBC, all these people are supposed to be taken care. Whether it's not taking care or not taking care, it's a case-to-case basis. Certain cases, they have also been paid fully. All employees been paid fully salaries for last period, 2 years and all that. We'll discuss going forward. So IBC is trying to take care of all the interests. Ultimately, see from larger perspective. Employee, the general manager who run the factory. Now factory is closed. His salary not paid for last 3 years. IBC will pay 2 years, not more than 2 years. What will happen? He has taken a housing loan. What will happen to housing loan? He default there because he not get the salary. And the housing loan given by some other bank. What will happen? That account become NPA. The destruction value of there also. But there's one NPA created, another set of NPA and somebody else go. So this is a spiraling effect of the overall economy. To minimize that part, or the supplier who supplies the raw material. It's a small SME company who supplies the raw material but not getting anything out of it. If it has not been paid, what will happen? The SME company will die. The SME company also raise money from some other bank. So that account will become NPA in their books. So this spiraling effect of one NPA to a third NPA, fourth NPA, fifth NPA, and then destruction of value is much more than what we see in the first basis. So balancing of interests of all the stakeholders are much more important. That is the crux of the IBC. Oh, I'm not discussing, but yes, right side I'm discussing. IBC stress on going concern basis. You can maximize the value, retain the employee, retain the supplier, retain the customer, retain the all the facilities, know-how, licenses only when there's a company running. And that gives the higher value than a business which is stopped doing work. So IBC always stress upon that show must be on. Show must not be stopped. Only then you can get a better value of the money and all stakeholders will be taken care of. Other thing we discussed, you move from debtor in possession to creditor in control. It will allow a larger discipline in the financial system. It will also take control of the company, so there is no further destruction of value in the hands of the defaulting borrower, promoter. Existing management has been barred to running the corporate debtor company. Board of that company or the partners of that company, it's the LLP, have been, all the powers of those gentlemen have been suspended during the CIRP. They don't have any power. In most of my cases, there are insolvency professional. We humbly tell our promoters and the directors, don't come to office. If you have some issue, please tell me. If you want to come on a particular day, you please tell me, I will arrange for it. Don't come every day. You are disrupting my business, my activity. Because they are most of the time they try to disrupt, which is never like. So we tell them, don't come. Means what? In some of the cases, I debarred them from entering the premises of the corporate debtor. of the same corporate debtor entity. Till yesterday, they were the promoter, they are the Malik. Today, they can't enter without my permission. We see the corporate debtor has been immune from the inefficiency, bad intentions, ill intentions of the promoters. See the left side of what this says. Code bifurcate, code means IBC, code bifurcate and separate the interests of corporate debtor from its promoters, management, with a primary focus of revival and continuation of corporate debtor, and by protecting corporate debtor from its own management, because that management has failed the business. So why to can't allow this person to continue? And also from a death by liquidation. So that's the aim. That's exactly words have been used in a Supreme Court judgment in one of the case, very famous case in IBC parallels called Swiss Ribbon matter. I'll be happy if anybody has interest, please go through. It is only 400 pages judgment. You can read out into us, no problem. IBC provide another issue. Not only you are not allowed to run the business during the CIRP, but the same management not allowed to opt and to take the business back through IBC process under section 29 at the debarred from act like a resolution applicant in this particular matter. So neither they come on during CIRP, nor they become a future promoters once again of the same business. This exactly happened in SRC. They tried very hard, Mr. Roya. They could not enter once again. New management is evaluated by the COC or the RP on its capacity and capability to recirculate, to revive the business. This is how it works. And if it doesn't work by any reason or by multiple of the reasons, it doesn't work, then liquidation is the final outcome, because effort to recirculate the business or fail. That's the reason we have to take the liquidation. I think that discussed in a different manner, so I'm not discussing it here because this will be slightly. So we discussed exclusive jurisdiction, NCLT and CLED Supreme Court. No more in between. Many times we hear that X High Court, Y High Court has given a verdict to stop acting on any decision given by NCLT, and they intervene and IBC provision, try to interpret IBC provision on their desk. It's a completely waste of time, because I think all honorable judges sitting there are aware of it, that no court in this country has any jurisdiction on the matter which are the jurisdiction matter of under IBC, except NCLT and CLED Supreme Court in the same hierarchy. You can't start your operations from Supreme Court. You have to go through the route. Go to NCLT, not happy, go to NCLT, not happy, go to Supreme Court. You can't do the reverse part of it. But no high court, no other court, unless it is a criminal involvement over there. If it's a criminal involvement, yeah, the court will come. Normal court will come and intervene. Evasion of net worth to payment default, I think I explained it clearly, and you please keep it for you for next time, because that is a very, very important change happened through IBC. जो आज बीमार है वो कल ज्यादा बीमार हो जाएगा, तो उसको 90 दिन का टाइम दिया, उसके बाद उसको बोले आइए आप वापस, अभी आपका सर्जरी करते हैं, अदरवाइज आप बाद में और ज्यादा बीमारी कर रहे हैं, तो क्लोज करते हैं, जो कि पहले नहीं होता था। पहले उसको 50% तक किडनी, हार्ट, पेनक्रियास सब कुछ उसको फेल करने देते थे, उसके बाद बोलते अब आप बीमार हो गए, आप टर्मिनली इल हैं, आप कुछ नहीं हो सकते। But that's not the matter which IBC say. IBC say, yeah, I want to resolve it. Come, yeah, I will give you medicine, but that can happen only with 90 days delay. You can't after 10 years. So payment default is the jurisdiction today to call somebody insolvent. We discussed right to file under CIRP. Creditor in possession we have discussed. Time-bound resolution process. Very clearly, date of order of admission plus 180 days. It should be resolved. If not, one-time extension of 90 days maximum, so 270 days. That is the time available for CIRP process. If that matter is also being cross referred to NCLAT or Supreme Court, and that time gone into that litigation. Including that time, the period cannot, this CIP period cannot go beyond 330 days. All matter down. Compulsorily, after 330 days, if matter has not been resolved, no resolution, the company will automatically being ordered by NCLT for liquidation. Can't wait for perennial. So it is a time-bound resolution process. Either I can resuccate you within 330 days or 270 days, or I'll take you to the cleaner through liquidation. I will not discuss much on it. Only thing that I want to tell that since stakeholders are bringing their money, bringing their services, bringing their goods and services, and they are supposed to take care of it, and it can happen only to maximize the value. Now, this is slightly different than the other cases we're talking about. So, only keep in mind that IBC is not for recovery, is for resolution. And resolution can happen when I'm able to meet all the obligations of all the stakeholders, largely. Okay, and there's a very means and ways of doing it. So keep that in mind, that nobody can take the value out of the business. If promoter had taken the money out of by preferential asset, extraordinary transactions, undervalued transaction, there's a provision under section 43, 50, 53, 66 that provides compel the promoter to take their money back, bring that value back to the corporate debtor so that I can maximize the value of the site. There is a provision of section 14. It is protected from all the kind of previous and current litigation, corporate debtor, all those litigations which are current or future would not be effective under section 14 as a moratorium on all the current and future litigations under CIR. Number one. Number two, and any creditor cannot dispose any of the asset, any of his asset of the corporate debtor during CIP period. It means all the asset, all the raw material, all the possible assets in the hands of the corporate debtor should be preserved. It should be focused only to resuscitate his business and resolve as stress instead of going to a liquidation, going to litigation. Somebody had taken the vehicle out of it, somebody had taken the employee out of it, somebody had taken the factory out of it. And then in all those areas, in all those circumstances, you cannot resuscitate the business. So section 14 is a moratorium on all those activities, just to give time for the corporate debtor to revive, rehabilitate. Again, I say it is not a recovery process, a resolution process. When insolvency order issued, RP take over the control of the company. RP means resolution professional. He or she invite claims from the stakeholders, creditors, operational creditor, employees, government, whosoever, by giving a public notice within 3 days of the order. So every step is time bound. You can't say, oh, bhul gaya, ye kuch karna tha. Acha, bhul gaya, main kal karunga. Nothing. Everything is T plus, T plus, T plus, T plus. If you miss out, you'll be penalized as a RP. So, since it's a time-bound exercise, every action, every step has been attached with the time. Within 30 days of order, he has to create a committee, form a committee, will be committee of creditors, all the financial creditors, if they are not related party, or they are not people in concert with the promoters, they would be forming a committee called Committee of Creditors, called COC. And COC has a major decision-making body and the entire CIRP who take all the decision to how the business being run, including give the direction to RP. And RP is more a executive. Of course, being called as a court person, also as a court nominee, sitting on the affairs of the company, but being guided by COC in directions. After taking control of it, RP invites the applications from other businesses, other eligible entities who are not promoters, or there is a long list of eligibility, who is eligible, who is not eligible. Existing promoters are not eligible. Anybody who is a willful default, anybody who has an NPA in the previous books or any other business cannot be resolution applicant. So resolution applicant has eligibility, mostly being very normal section called 29A has been defined. Anybody who's not covered under 29A is a applicant, resolution applicant. Resolution plan have been called so that they can say, okay, fine, I'm the person who can take this business to the next level. I'm able to address the obligations of this corporate debtor by paying X money to financial creditor, Y money to employee, Z money to government, or all the other stakeholders who have come to picture, and take the control of the company. He will assume the control of the company after this resolution plan being approved by COC and finally approved by NCLT. And thereafter, new management will take control of the company under IBC provision. So if that is not happening, resolution plan is not there, resolution plan is not approved by COC, resolution plan is rejected by adjudicating authority, or 330 days have been passed and nothing has happened, then company would be automatically called for liquidation.
So, sir, there's one question. Sir, how does black money economy deter the resolution process?
So very simple way, basically black money, unless come in the formal channel, cannot be used for addressing any issue related to insolvency process. Black money had to be channelized in the formal manner. We are not discussing, because who are the stakeholders? Understand, the resolution application will come, resolution applicant will come. Who will pay to? Lender. Will they take cash? Will they collect your unnamed bank wire from Cyprus or Virginia Island? No. Okay. Can you take salary through in cash more than 50,000 rupees? Tell me if you are taking now, right now. Okay. Can you collect UPI from somebody? Even UPI has the KYC, so black money cannot enter. Government use, you can't do anything. So effectively, unless black money is channelized, I don't know how to channelize. I am not done it, so I really don't know. It cannot address any part of the insolvency process, either way, liquidation or insolvency or CIR.
So the next question is, sir, do trade unions create hurdles in the resolution process?
Mostly. But let's understand the practical side of it. The trade union is supposed to take care of interests of the employees, of the workmen. Mostly I'm talking about workmen. बाकी के ट्रेड यूनियन खत्म हो गए इंडिया के अंदर, एम्प्लॉइज को कोई ट्रेड यूनियन होता नहीं है इंडिया से. वर्कमैन का होता है, फैक्ट्री टू फैक्ट्री, यस ऑफ कोर्स दे हैव. ओके, नाउ व्हाट इज देयर इंटरेस्ट? टू टेक द सैलरी ऑन टाइम, टू रन द फैक्ट्री, टू पे ओवर टाइम. This is the basic requirement of any workman. Okay, now factory is closed. Okay, so what is the solution? I need support of the workman and the union to rerun the factory. It serves my purpose. If you help me, it helps the purpose. Yeah. If you create hurdle, what is the next level? I will not run the factory as a RP. If I don't run the factory, will the workman get the salary, their change basis? No. Will they get their gratuity on time, their medical facility on time? No. Okay. If they create hurdle in production, factory is on, but production is not happening. The production is not having, I don't have money. So next month I will not pay the wages. If you not allow me to run the factory, I will not able to. If you create hurdle in creating a resolution plan approved, what will happen? Resolution plan will not come. So what is after 330 days? What will happen? Liquidation. What is liquidation? Sell the asset. So where the workmen go? Number one. Will they get the old dues? They will not get old dues also because there is no money. So trade union, if they are smart trade union, unless they have their own agenda to do something else which they want, their interest is to run the factory, and exactly the purpose of RP to run the factory. So it is both are on the other side of the table. They are on the same side of the table. So smart trade union. I had a very good case in Faridabad. Initially there was a hiccup and there was a disturbances in the factory. Almost 600 employees, workmen working over there. But we sit with those people, try to explain them in a simple language I'm explaining to you, in a pure Hindi and Haryanavi effectively, because I'm from Haryana also. With them, make them very clear, look, it is in your interest to take care of our interest. If you close the factory, I'm more happy because I'm not supposed to come all the way from Mumbai to Faridabad. फैक्ट्री तो बंद है, मैं क्या करूंगा? आप फैक्ट्री चलाएंगे तो मुझे भी आके बैठना पड़ेगा. तो ये मेरे इंटरेस्ट में है कि आप फैक्ट्री बंद कर दें, ये आपके इंटरेस्ट में है कि आप फैक्ट्री चलाएं. आप बताइए क्या करते हैं? तो चलाएंगे कि बंद करें? नहीं साहब चलाएंगे. वेरी गुड. कौन कंट्रोल लेगा? तो जो यूनियन थे, those people have been given responsibility. There should not be no labor disturbance from any of you guys. If anybody making disturbance, you have to report to me. I can't sit in your factory 24/7. I have some other 10 cases. I have to go to NCLT Mumbai for appearance. So I can't sit here. You take control of it and you mind it. The factory operation should not be disturbed. I will come once in a week, twice a week. I'll sit with you and try to resolve your issues. I will make sure your wage is paid on time. I make sure your job will not go. I make sure new owner will come and take over the factory, and you not be out of the job. So it is your own interest. The resolution plan will come, factory will run, so that I can protect your job. As simple as that. If you don't, I'll be more happy doing it. Not doing it. So, what trade union 1980s, 1970s, when I joined the bank in 1983, trade union not allow people to enter office and start working. Those trade unions are not there. That's my practical experience.
So the next question is, what are the career prospects for legal professionals under the code?
Very much. Very much. पहला बात तो ये है कि मैं ऐसा बोलता हूँ कि IBC is 60% management, 20% legal, because legacy issue come, and IBC obviously structured and governed by NCLT, and the legal are more equipped to handle that part. RP effectively is not equipped to handle unless you are yourself is a legal background. All those areas are being handled by, in my cases also, and all the cases. IBC is a very simple law. As I said, it's not depending on the case laws. It's depending upon the understanding of the law, understanding the practical side of it, more understanding of the commercial part of the legal than the legal part of the legal and legal part of the legal. The commercial part of legal part and legal part of the legal law is two different things. Commercial part of the legal is try to find a solution. Legal part of the legal law find a hurdle and say, look, you can't do this. In IBC, you cannot work like that. So you have to understand the law. Of course, you have to work within the four walls of the code itself. You can't go beyond it. But within that, can you find a solution which is not flouting the norm, flouting the orders of the NCLT, not flouting the code, but still find a solution which is legally possible. Yeah. So if you have that mindset, then I don't know how many legal professionals being produced every year, but I can tell you, as of now, March number 4,300 cases has already been admitted under IBC. All the cases, irrespective of where they are, in NCLT and then CLAT or Supreme Court, at least 10,000 plus legal must be. 10,000, I'm talking some lower number. I'm sure number must be higher. At least 10 to 12,000 legal has already been engaged in this case. Already, number one. Number two, 16,000 cases are already being referred to NCLT at different level. They are at different level of admission. So this number will go. 4,000 will not become 3,000. 4,000 will become 9,000 after 12 months. So you can understand how much requirement of the legal going forward. Number one. Number two, Many people ask this question. IBC का क्या होगा? इतना चेंजेस होता है, इतना टाइम लगता है, इतना NCLT ऑर्डर करने में देर करता है, क्या होगा? ये वैसे ही होगा जैसे DRT में हो गया, इफेक्टिव खत्म हो जाएगा, इफेक्टिवनेस नहीं होगा, इसका रिकवरी बहुत कम होता है. Many unknown naysayer on the road talk about. Let me tell you, mark my word, IBC is here to stay. It's not going away. If you create hurdle either through your legal practice or your non-action in NCLT level or your foolhardy situation on corporate debtor and promoter level, you create hurdle, I remove the hurdle. If you see last 2 years, the kind of amendment has been brought into IBC. You create a hurdle in IBC, I will remove the hurdle. I'll bring the law to stop you to misuse the code or misuse the floor of the NCLT to create hurdle of smooth IBC process. I will remove the hurdle by law itself. So, one question, one answer, very simple, is going to stay here. It will change the way corporate banking, corporate lending, corporate behavior is acting at that point of time in the country. It's going to be smoother. It's going to be smoother. It would be is already prevailing most of the laws in the country. They're prevailing all the relevant clauses of Companies Law, Companies Act, Custom Act, Sales Tax Act, even to largely to even PMLA also. Of course, yeah, certain anomalies are still there. They say parallel and they say both can run together. Fine, no issue. I can't say. In India, the problem is in India that we don't have patience. In developed country, insolvency practice took at least 2 decades to come to a stage where they are today. In India, the first time notified in December 16, we're just completing 5 years now. And we are completely impatient. मेरा कैरियर का क्या होगा, IBC का क्या होगा, NCLT का क्या होगा, हमको करना चाहिए, कुछ और करें क्या? Every day I hear from young people or from older people like me also. So we are too impatient to see these practices on. For young people, I must say that if you have interest, not everybody has interest, everybody is not having the attitude towards it. If you have interest to repair the things, खराब हो गया ठीक कर लेते हैं, ना कि फेंक देते हैं और नया ले आते हैं. अगर आपका ये माइंडसेट है कि आपको ये चीज खराब हो गया है, अकाउंट खराब हो गया है, ये मशीन काम नहीं कर रहा है, इसको रिपेयर कर लेते हैं, काम आने वाला चीज है. अगर आपका ये एटीट्यूड है और आपका लीगल एटीट्यूड है उन चीजों को रिजॉल्व करने के लिए, ना कि कन्फ्रंटेशन में रहने के लिए 24 घंटे, तो ये प्रोफेशन आपको अच्छा अपॉर्चुनिटी देता है. Starting from when you're starting as an intern, there's a lot of demand in intern in the practices, why there is a IPE where the insolvency professionals are operating. Because see, in my case, I'm not a legal person. I had a banking background, which allows me to see things from a very different perspective than the chartered accountant insolvency professional or legal insolvency professional, right? But I don't have a legal background. If I had to take a interpretation of a legal understanding, which I did in the morning, sit with my legal team, had 3 hours session on a particular issue. Of course, I have to find legal support. I can't do on my own. I need people who are the legal background. So, right from internship, half of the team is internship, middle level and the senior level. So, right from intern to senior, you had ample opportunity to follow. Of course, yes, it is not business which is no monkey business. You can't do black money. किसी ने पूछा अभी black money का क्या रोल है? Black money का रोल नहीं है IBC में. You as a professional, or you as a resolution applicant, or you as a banker, no malpractices. I'm so severely monitored by my IBPI, my control and regulator. But this discussion which I have with you, I had to report tomorrow morning. Monday morning, I had to report. Within 3 days, I had to report. I had interaction with plea on this topic. It's nothing to do with my insolvency practice. But I have to report to them. right? So you have highly regulated regime. They punish you like anything. They take your license straight away. अब लोग बोलते हैं कि वो तो लॉयर का भी ले लेते हैं. बताइए कितने लॉयर्स का लाइसेंस बार काउंसिल ने कैंसिल किया है पिछले 1 साल, पिछले 5 साल में, 10 साल, 25 साल. मैं आपको बता सकता हूँ 3% इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशन का लाइसेंस कैंसिल हुआ है पिछले 1 साल. 3% इज वेरी हाई. बिल्कुल नया प्रैक्टिस है. आधे लोगों को तो समझ नहीं आया, गलती में गलती कर देते हैं, उनको नॉलेज नहीं है इसलिए गलती करते हैं. But they are not being allowed to. They are simply punished. Take the license out. Suspend the license for 1 year. So this is a highly regulated profession. If you are interested to do business ethical manner, yeah, it is here, including law practice also. That is what I can say.